Hey, this is Doc speaking, and welcome back to my Jungian typology series where I attempt to explain Jungian typology. Before we continue, I just want to let you guys know that this video has gone through many changes, so if anything seems out of whack throughout the video, I apologize for that. I have been updating information here that I originally presented, so I had to switch out some clips, and also I'm still working on my audio and my editing skills overall, and I'm not working with the most current computer, so please bear with me. I thank you for watching any way that you do. Today I'm going to go over more of the functions in depth. Well, I'm going to start going over more of the functions in depth, starting with sensation and the two different sensation functions, extraverted sensation and introverted sensation. Now, originally I had already done a recording, but I thought about it and I did not like how, because originally how I went about doing this is I went through multiple definitions I got from multiple sources on the sensation function alone, not specifically extroverted sensation or introverted sensation, just that base function sensation. And I came to realize that was redundant and tedious because they were all basically saying the same thing. There weren't any major differences. So instead, I decided to write down a list of things that I took from those definitions and go over what sensation is with that list instead of having to read each definition I gathered. So we're going to do that now with this list. So first of all, from Michael Peirce's definition, we have established that sensation is denotative perception. And if you remember correctly, denotative means literal meaning, while perception is data assessment, is the gathering of data, it's observations, to keep it short. So that's what sensation is. But to go more into depth, what sensation is, it is what is simply there. It's tangible data, yes. It's what is known from the past and from the present. It's experiential awareness. It's observable facts. It's concrete data. It is directly experienced. Socionics uses the terms external and involved. External basically means data that is objective and observable in the outside world, while involved means it's experienced viscerally. So that's still true in the case of sensation. Sensation is, quote, more inclined to perceive with the body than the mind. So this is talking about the difference between sensation and intuition. Sensation being more inclined to perceive with the body, while intuition is more inclined to perceive with the mind. So more on that when we talk about intuition, but that's true. Real things over concepts, that's again talking about the difference between sensation and intuition, and that's definitely true. Gathering directly from the sensory organs rather than from the unconscious. Again, sensation versus intuition. Intuition gathers, per se, from the unconscious, while sensation gathers from the sensory organs. So, you can say that's true, yes. Lastly, one last thing to know about sensation is that it is not the same as the 5 traditional senses. It deals with information that has already been gathered from the biological senses. For example, if you lose your ability to hear or to see, you're still going to have your sensation function. However, it's just going to be whatever reaches your mind, whatever sensation still reaches your mind. Like, for example, with the sense of touch, if you're able to touch something, that can still translate to your mind, and you can still, your sensation function is still going to be able to take that and make something of that. But that's not to say the sensation functions are the same as the 5 traditional senses. So long as we understand that, we're good. So that's what sensation is as a base function. Both extroverted and introverted sensation are involved in this. There's nothing in this where the two aren't sharing, in a sense. Now we're going to go over a list of definitions for Xray Sensation, which come from multiple sources, and we're going to start with Michael Pierce's definition. And the point of doing this is so that way we can compare the definitions to each other and see which ones work, which ones don't, and formulate our opinions from there. So, Xray Sensation. Perceiving was objectively denoted. On-site news report. Colonel Mustard did in fact murder Mr. Body with a candlestick. Later on within the same chapter, Michael goes over each cognitive function in greater detail and how each one influences the people who use them. As for Xray Sensation, to give a quick summary, he mentions how this function takes for granted that its perceptions are the same for everyone, that the same reality is publicly accessible. He also mentions that Xray Sensation is direct and immediate, that it has a quality of showmanship, and that, quote, truth is proportionate to the degree of its objective presence. In Myers-Briggs type indicator, Xray Sensation is generally described as a focus on the five senses, as well as impulsiveness. From the first site that I found while Googling Xray Sensation for Myers-Briggs, quote, Xray Sensation is using taste, touch, smell, sound, movement, and sight to easily absorb information in the physical world. As strongly observant, these people pick up on details other people do not notice, and some even have a photographic memory. They love excitement, spontaneity, new experiences, and material goods. Now again, Xray Sensation is not the same as your five senses, your five biological senses. It's just that when it comes to Myers-Briggs, it's not exactly, I don't think it exactly cares to really make an emphasis on that difference. I think it's focused more on explaining things in a very simplistic manner. In fact, in Myers-Briggs type indicator, the most popular version, they don't even talk about cognitive function. So, but when you do see Xray Sensation in Myers-Briggs, like when you see a type that's supposed to use it, this is what tends to translate from it. It's lacking in some areas, and I find it to be also stereotypical. But moving on, Xray Sensation in objective personality gathers a variety of observable facts. An old quote I got from one of their videos, I found the video, I'll make sure to link it in the description below. Dave had said, all he does is he looks around and he takes it all in. What's the facts? He doesn't make any decisions, he doesn't narrow in, he doesn't focus, he doesn't ask too many questions, he's not ascending N, intuition, he's just SE, Xray Sensation. So again, this reestablishes that Extraverted Sensation is an observation function. It's observing, taking in what is directly there. On page 336 of Carl Jung's Psychological Types, he describes the Extraverted Sensation type. No other human type can equal the Extraverted Sensation type in realism. His sense for objective facts is extraordinarily developed. His life is an accumulation of actual experiences of concrete objects, and the more pronounced his type, the less use does he make of his experience. In certain cases, the events of his life hardly deserve the name experience at all. What he experiences serves at most as a guide to fresh sensations. Anything new that comes within his range of interest is acquired by way of sensation and has to serve its ends. Since one is inclined to regard a highly developed reality sense as a sign of rationality, such people will be esteemed as very rational. But in actual fact, this is not the case, since they are just as much at the mercy of their sensations in the face of irrational, chance happenings as they are in the face of rational ones. This type, the majority appear to be men, naturally does not think he is at the mercy of sensation. He would ridicule this view as quite beside the point, because sensation for him is a concrete expression of life. It is simply real life lived to the full. One major thing that I personally take away from this quote is that, first of all, Jung makes it very clear that anyone using Xray Sensation has a very close and pure, almost untainted experience with reality. Because of this, their experience seems to come off as a purely objective one. However, Jung makes it clear that even extroverted sensors can still be fooled just like anyone else. Any person can be fooled by their own perceptions. It just depends on how. An extroverted sensor will not be fooled by what goes on around him or her. They will be the most aware and the most present to what's going on. However, they probably can still be fooled by their intuition, or rather lack thereof. With such a strong focus on what's the reality in front of them, they may not consider any reoccurring patterns. When intuition tries to compare objects to one another, it ends up ignoring their differences in favor of their similarities, but sensation would rather prioritize the differences over the similarities, especially extraverted sensation. At least with introverted sensation, it may still subjectively relate one sensory experience to another. But with extraverted sensation, there is none of that subjective personal bias. Every experience is different, which would explain why objective personality boils extraverted sensation down to simply the gathering of sensory experiences. Cognitive typology, photology. Extraverted sensation as an extraverted perceiving function. Extraverted sensation has a short cycle of decay, limiting its exploration to the numerous qualities that objects and situations evidence. And since extraverted sensation requires a concrete analog to stimulate a mental object, it does not diverge its attention from the environment like extraverted intuition, but instead sinks more acutely into the physical world to extract out a greater volume of subtleties and data sets. This gives extraverted sensation a photographic approach to information, a somatic registration of reality, and a sense of presence. However, this sense of presence also makes extraverted sensation more susceptible to the conditions of the physical environment, such as through noise and irritants. This photographic focus is not easy to turn off, leading to a higher sensitivity to stimuli and a need to adjust those conditions. Inversely, if the environment is providing insufficient stimulation, extraverted sensation will compel the individual to take a more kinesthetic and mobilizing route of exploration and seek out new landscapes with richer details to extract. It will have a magnetic attraction to areas with the most pleasant and aesthetic frequencies. This makes extraverted sensation's exploration opportunistic rather than optimistic like extraverted intuition. Extraverted sensation identifies existent opportunities for high stimuli in the environment, rather than being satiated with simulated potentialities. So that was from cognitype.com. I find that their definition of extraverted sensation is very detailed, very good at explaining what to expect from an individual that uses extraverted sensation, how extraverted sensation causes that individual to act. So moving on. Casual Cognition, that's the name of the YouTube channel, aka cognitive8.com. Extraverted sensation is an observational process based on present external connections. Since there is no internal structure, each connection only applies in the moment. The extroverted sensor is free to stumble upon the same connections in the future. These observations are in the sensory realm, which includes specific objects and experiences. It tends to be swift in bouncing from one concrete observation to the next. Extraverted sensing tends to connect information based on their physical similarities. It tends to be adept at interacting with current sensory information. Working with introverted intuition, it tends to see the whole picture. Like other extrovert processes, extraverted sensing leans towards dynamic and transitive. Since there is no internal structure, extraverted sensors make connections in the moment. Since memory is a universal mechanism, extraverted sensing can recall a specific experience, but it tends to forget how it relates to other past experiences. Unlike introverted sensing, extraverted sensing does not form stable associations between sensory information. So, the interesting thing about this definition is that it makes a good point that memory is not necessarily connected to one specific cognitive function. like online, you'll see some websites will say that Xray Sensation is the memory function, or that Xray Sensation and Xray intuition can't remember for very long, or whatever. And I think it's a strong point that memory does not necessarily have anything to do with cognitive functions. There may be some kind of correlation, but not like a direct causation, not a direct relationship there. So the point that this definition made is that yes, Xray Sensation can store things away in a person's memory, because memory is a universal mechanism, but it won't be the one connecting a sensory experience to other past sensory experiences. That's more in line with Xray Sensation. And when we talk about Xray Sensation, we'll come to understand that idea of connecting one experience to another experience more. But for now, this is good enough. Now, in socionics, you're going to start to see a major difference on the understanding of Xray Sensation. So, to start with WikiSocion, sensing of immediate static qualities of objects, sensing of immediate reality, external appearance, texture, form, static objects, impact, direct physical effect, span, extent, scope. Awareness of the space and concrete environment around oneself, externally observatory state of mind. Sensing of reality, factual perception of reality. Everything around you gets registered, no matter if you can touch it or if it's way off in the distant distance. A mobilized state, exerting force on objects and people with the goal of moving them around in space. An Xray Sensation perception. A person or object can be influenced only in space. Xray Sensation is also described as a static information element, discrete spatial boundaries that delineate territory and control. Described as Xray information element, one is aware of external properties of reality or not. When we go over to Sociotype.com now, Xray sensing is an extroverted, irrational, and static information element. It is also called SE, F for force, volitional sensing, or black sensing. It's also represented by a black circle. Xray sensing includes the ability to know how much power, force, or influence is latent or required. Types that value Xray sensation are much more comfortable with direct behavior aimed at making an immediate impact. This may at times be perceived as abrasive, particularly by types who do not value Xray sensation. There is usually a competitive edge to the style of group interaction, resulting in a more intense atmosphere than that of Xray sensing valuing quadras. They appreciate contemplating possibilities only if they feel like they stand to gain something from it, or it has a perceived potential impact on the real world. Unlike Xray sensation, which is about one's subjective sensory experience, how intense or enjoyable it is, Xray sensation is about achieving an object of desire. It gives one the ability to influence, bend, and push situations and people in order to achieve such an object, rather than to enjoy the situation one is in. So, you may have not gotten all that, but to summarize, within socionics is now associated with the idea of force and power and having an impact on your environment. So that's the main thing to keep in mind here. World Socionics also agrees with this, saying, energizing sensation, sensation of force, boosts one's power and dominance over the physical surroundings. This instills an attitude of competition and assertiveness, treating things as straightforward and direct, intensely pursuing one's ambitions in the real world and overcoming challenges to gain more territory. So, is Xray sensation equal to force? Before we go on to what I have written down here, I would like to say that it depends on the model and the definitions that you're using. If you're using socionics and their model and their definitions, then that's fine. If you're not, that's also fine. If you do not agree with socionics and their definition, that's fine. You use a different model. So it's not necessarily that there's a correct or wrong way to use this, because in Jungian typology, there's a lot of models, and there's not one specific model you're supposed to adhere to, just a lot of different models, a lot of different camps. You can, have your preferences for one model over another model, or for one definition over another definition. Personally, I wouldn't use the power, force, and impact on one's environment. I wouldn't associate that with extraverted sensation specifically. I wouldn't put in the definition specifically because it sounds more like you're applying behaviors onto extraverted sensation. And for me personally, I don't like doing that for my definitions because then I'm inclined to then tie based on behavior. Then I'm inclined to pay attention to how forceful someone is rather than to the idea that extraverted sensation is an observation function and therefore paying attention to how observant someone is to their environment. I will say though, there is a correlation to this idea of having force and power to your environment. So I'll now read this section to go further into depth. To understand the idea behind how sociotypes explains extraverted sensing, we have to understand how they explain sensing. The word space is sometimes used for this function. The extroverted objective aspect of this, understanding the space that belongs to a person, and how this can be expanded or defended. It's about force, influence, and how much space things take up. Perceives everything as a clash of different spaces. If you are constantly picking up information about the physical environment, it is reasonable to say that you will inevitably start to experiment with said information and grow an understanding for how to manipulate the physical environment, physical realm, or physics as we know it. Maybe not actually physics as we know it. That was kind of silly now that I think about it. This gives extraverted sensation users mechanical aptitude, power, and dominance over their physical surroundings. So that's the connection here. It's not that there is no correlation between an extraverted sensation user using force in their environment. There is an association there. It's just that as a behavior, how often do you want to use that behavior to type other people? That's the part that I tend to have a problem with that definition. How often does it have to happen in order for someone to be an extraverted sensation user? So that's something to keep in mind when you decide which model you want to use, which definitions you want to use. So with Dario Nardi, what he does is there is one line of definition right here, but the rest of it, when he goes to explain extraverted sensation, is more of a list of behaviors. And like I said before, I don't like the idea of using behaviors as the definition of a cognitive function. I do acknowledge that behavior, you can use behaviors to type, but at the same time, it doesn't trump the actual definition and the actual cognitive processing that's going on in the mind. That's how I approach things. Nevertheless, I will still read this out because I do believe that there are some good associations here. Extraverted sensing, immersing in the present context. So that's the one line of definition there. Then here we go to the list of behaviors. Respond naturally to everything tangible you detect through your senses. Check what your gut instincts tell you. Test limits and take risks for big rewards. Act quickly and smoothly to handle whatever comes up in the moment. Excited by motion, action, and nature. Adept at physical multitasking with a video game-like mind primed for action. Often in touch with body sensations. Bored when sitting with a mental route task. Strong memory for details in context. Use their whole brain to handle crises. May be impatient to finish. So yeah, and that's extraverted sensation for you. Now we're going to move on to introverted sensation. And then afterwards, we'll compare and contrast more between those two functions.